There are many reasons that I build my own engines from scratch, and one that's not what you think. It has to do with the collapse of civilization. But first, let's talk about the obvious stuff that made me quit game engines. Why do most people stick with big engines like Unity even when they're frustrated? I speak to developers that have successful games published that hate working in their engine. For them, dealing with frustration feels safer than starting over, and much safer than going engine free. Some of them don't even like programming, so that makes sense. But here's the thing. Much of what they are protecting is engine-specific trivia that never transfers anywhere else anyway. I used to think that serialization was difficult, because it was, back when I used Unity as my main engine. Nowadays, with my knowledge of building custom engines, it's not only trivial, but it's actually fun to write serialization code for my games. One of the reasons that serialization was such a chore back in those days was because of Unity's version control tool. It was rudimentary, it was pretty new at the time, it had merge conflicts constantly, and it lost us hours, sometimes days of work. That's not even to mention the compile times in Unity, Godot, and Unreal. Sitting around for tens of seconds or sometimes minutes just to test a change is kind of insane considering how powerful modern computers really are. So when I'm writing my own game engine, whether it's 2D or 3D, if the compile time is greater than 1 second on my desktop, then something's wrong. 2 seconds on my laptop. Beyond the day-to-day minutia, it's also about control. What happens when something breaks in a third-party engine? You're stuck waiting for a patch or a workaround, and you're praying that the patch doesn't add more bugs. In my world, well, I can dive in and fix it myself immediately, and that forces a higher quality. No excuses, no finger pointing, because I'll just be pointing at myself in the mirror anyway. So I have to take full responsibility for any low-quality outcome, and that's actually empowering. My stat distribution is heavily weighted towards programming, and I care about software craftsmanship, and so this is my way to lead by example, proving that you don't need these massive tools to make something great. If this resonates with you and you want to learn how to build games without fighting your tools, check out Program Video Games, where I teach how to build 4 unique game engines from scratch, and links in the description. If you want to take game engines seriously and treat it like a business, you have to manage your risk profile. So using a third-party engine is a non-trivial liability. If at any point the incentives of you and the company that is making your game engine don't align, they can cause serious damage. Now here are some real stories to prove that. So back in 2023, Unity was the go-to engine for indies, and that market share has been significantly eaten into by Godot since then, and a little bit by Unreal. And this is one of the reasons. If you somehow haven't heard of the runtime fee fiasco, let me lay it out for you. So Unity announced a pricing change, adding a 20-cent fee. And after a threshold of earnings and installs or downloads, the developer was to pay Unity per installation of their game. And here's the thing. It applied to games that were already published and also to every subsequent instance of an installation. So even the same user, if they installed the game again and then deleted it and then installed it and then deleted it, that would incur a 20-cent fee every time. Now, as you can imagine, the game developer community was pretty upset about this, and rightfully so. Many studios face potential bankruptcy if this came in, just due to the way their games were priced. If you had a free-to-play game that got millions of installs per year, but it doesn't make any money, well, pretty soon you'd owe Unity 6 figures. After massive backlash, Unity scrapped the per-install fee entirely in 2024, but the damage was done. Many devs had their trust broken and left Unity for other engines, or they went engine-free. In 2022, there was an engine called Our Machinery, and they were being developed by 2 ex-Autodesk developers, and they started in 2021. It was a promising, extensible game engine written in C. It seemed like a reliable, up-and-coming alternative without the bloat of engines like Unity or Unreal. However, in 2022, the company shut down, terminated all licenses overnight, and they demanded that all studios using the engine delete their source code and binaries within 14 days. There was no migration path, and we still aren't exactly sure what happened. One Hacker News user commented that a friend had been building a game using Our Machinery, and had started the painful process of porting it to Godot. 2 companies you might be familiar with, Arrowhead and Fatshark, the creators of the Helldivers franchise and Warhammer 40k Darktide respectively, had invested financially into Our Machinery. The engine's failure meant that investment was wasted, though they weren't developing games in it that we know of. And one last example here is the Unity security vulnerability in 2025. So using new technology is generally riskier, but what about using something that's been around for ages? Well, let's take another look at a recent security vulnerability with Unity games published since 2017. As indie game developers, we don't want to have to understand everything about cybersecurity. So we offload the responsibility to the authors of the tools we use. It just makes sense. But what happens when the people making the tools make a mistake? Everyone using them pays the price. Any game made with Unity 2017.1 up until around October 2025, that's 8 years, had to patch this vulnerability. Fortunately, Unity provided a binary patch tool to apply the fix without doing a full rebuild. So if you had lost the Unity project, you could still patch your game. And there's no evidence that the exploit was actually used that we know of. These aren't hypotheticals that may one day happen. They have happened, and they will continue to happen. With a custom engine, you don't have that kind of risk. Programming games from scratch is made out to be this Herculean task that only a few can accomplish. Maybe that's true, maybe not. All I know is that if your stat distribution is over-indexed into programming, or you want it to be, then this path is not just possible, but can be easier. I enjoy low-level programming, bit flipping, data packing, pointer abuse, memory management, all that kind of stuff. For me, it's easier to create a small game engine that fits my needs rather than to learn and fight with one of these big engines. If you don't want to start from scratch, working in a systems language like Odin or C means you can use pretty much any library out there easily. From something like raylib, which handles windowing, input, sound, rendering, and even some collision detection, to something more bare bones like SDL3 or Sokol. I have no editor overhead. What I type is what compiles. And it takes me less than 1 second to compile my game. My game, which, by the way, has a playtest available on Steam right now, and also a web build playable on itch.io. So if you're into Zachtronic style games, then I think you'll like Lane 4. Links in the description. And finally we get to the reason that may seem a little bit outlandish, but it makes total sense. The collapse of civilization. As we move into this LLM-powered future, more and more developers are outsourcing not just their programming, but their critical thinking to idiot machines. Machines are not conscious, they cannot think, but they can produce a simulacrum of what a human can. The effect of offloading these skills is that less people understand how computers work at a fundamental level. This is an issue since almost all of our infrastructure is built with computers of some kind, be it the tiny microcontroller in your air conditioner or the high-powered CPU in your phone or computer. It follows that if less people understand how to fix our infrastructure, that will create a skill supply shortage. Increasingly, situations will arise in which nobody is available to fix the problem, and part of our civilizational infrastructure is left to degrade. Knowledge is not automatically propagated forward, otherwise we would have a crystal clear understanding of the ancient Egyptians, or the Mayans and Aztecs, or the Mesopotamians, for example. Instead, we have fragments, and we piece these together like a puzzle that can never be completely solved. Now, this loss of knowledge has happened in the distant past and the very recent past. There are a couple of good talks on this already, so I'd recommend you watch these if you're interested. One is called Preventing the Collapse of Civilization by Jonathan Blow. Another is 1177 BC, The Year Civilization Collapsed by Eric Klein. I highly recommend watching both of those. Now, finally, if you want to learn to build games from fundamentals without the engine lock-in, join me on PVG, Program Video Games. The link is below. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next one.